My name is Brandy Sharp, and I will be going over my intervention plan called Cut the Cravings. So, I'll first introduce to you the targeted behavior, which is my craving for potatoes. So, weeks ago, I went on a raw vegan diet to help with some issues that I've been having. And so, one of the things I've noticed that I've craved during the diet is potatoes. And so, I wanted to figure out what are some different ways that I could implement that would stop that potato craving. And so, I went on and did a few research about these cravings or just cravings in general. One of the things that I noticed is that I was craving before the vegan diet, I was not eating consistently. And so maybe that could have played into me craving potatoes. So, according to Penn State, it says avoid long stretches of not eating. Eat a nutritious meal or snack every 3 to 4 hours during the day. Waiting too long to eat because you are busy or distracted may only lead to stronger hunger when you do eat and the risk of overeating. Also, keep in mind that if your bedtime is more than 4 hours after you finish your meal, you may feel hungry again. To avoid late night snacking, which can disrupt your sleep, try to go to bed earlier when possible. And so, this is one of the things that actually really helped me out when getting accustomed to this diet. That's actually one of the first things that I noticed is that I got better sleep. And I was eating periodically during the day compared to I would only eat once. And so with McGill University, it says our results show that instructing university students to imagine themselves engaging in their favorite activity when experiencing a craving reduce the intensity of the cravings. And this is one of the reasons why I did set my plan up the way I did. It says this reduction was fully mediated by reduction in the vividness of the craving related hunger, given that imagery is one of the core craving experiences. So, what better way to fight a craving by imagining yourself doing another thing? The last one was done by a few researchers or psychologists. It says an important distinction between food reinforcement and more traditional approaches to eating is the potential for understanding non regulatory ingestive behavior as opposed to eating that is maintained by nutrient or energy depletion or homeostatic need. It is likely that both of these areas of research are important in understanding factors that regulate intake. A focus on factors that influence eating outside of homeostatic need provides the opportunity to examine how non-food reinforcers or behaviors influence eating, as well as how factors such as accessibility or behavioral costs can shift consumption. And so one of the things we have to, or I had to make the distinction was why am I eating like this? What are some different approaches that I need to take? How can I take a different approach that I've done in the past? So, this was a great article to keep in mind once I was creating an intervention plan. And so, the next thing we're going to talk about is the methods. So we're going to go over the data collection, the antecedent control and reinforcements, the cognitive strategies, and any problems and changes that I made or adjustments during the intervention plan. So, how I collected my data is I kept a journal or basically wrote down a table of my date, the time, the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequences. And so, when we first did this project, I kept an original journal of my activity during Monday through Friday. Those are my busiest days, so I thought that would be very beneficial. So Monday through Friday, most of my cravings for potatoes came around lunchtime. And the behavior, of course, since I'm on the raw vegan diet, I only ate raw foods. But there were some days where I had no desire to eat. There are some days that even though I had no desire to eat, I still ate anyway. And then there were some days that I only ate half my food. And so, one of the things about looking at the data collection before is that these cravings were more sporadic. And so, that's one of the things that I kept in mind when creating the intervention plan. I said that even though I cannot control the craving times, I can't control how I reinforce those cravings or reinforce that behavior. And so when doing that, um, I was the after. So when looking at the data after the experiment or after the intervention plan, I again did it Monday through Friday. And I noticed that the cravings were more stable. And so, again, most of the cravings happened around lunchtime, or the cravings that I would notice before that didn't happen this time. And so, the first 2 days, spot on. No cravings whatsoever. I was able to eat my dinner. I had hot chocolate after dinner for both days. But the second day, I ate dinner, but I could only eat two of, I call them coconut tacos. So I only ate two, and then after the second one, I actually got nauseous, and so I stopped eating. What was interesting is early the next morning, I was craving potatoes. Like I needed something now. But I eat fruit, I eat raw fruit, so that's what I ended up doing. But because I did not satisfy that, or what I thought did not satisfy that craving for potatoes, I um, had no desire to eat dinner. And so, because of that, I did not have any hot chocolate. And so, the second day, which was Thursday, I began to crave potatoes again, and I knew that this was taking a bad turn in this plan, so I had to adjust. And so once I adjusted the plan around lunchtime, I didn't crave potatoes at all. Okay, there we go. And so the antecedent control and reinforcement. And so the proposed plan is to use the differential reinforcement procedure when attempting to change this behavior. The differential reinforcement procedure reinforces one set of responses and not forcing another set of responses. So, since I'm unsure, like you saw on the first chart, I was unsure how the cravings were coming. I when I was unsure how to react when I didn't satisfy that carbohydrate craving. I know I can control how I reinforce the desired behavior with a reward and extinguish others with no reward. I have noticed that my favorite food on this diet is the moringa hot chocolate, and it's all natural. I even get it from um, and kind of a nature farmers market type. And so it's all natural, it's raw, and I can use this within my intervention plan as a reward for not craving food. And if I happen to crave food that day, I won't drink the hot chocolate. So, some cognitive strategies that I've used is I kept a food journal that consisted of what I ate that day and how I felt after the meal. Also took pictures of my food during the week. This helped me staying on my raw vegan diet. So what you see is my typical breakfast: seedless half of a seedless watermelon, and if I was still hungry, I would eat the other half of the watermelon with some lemon tea or lemon water. So, some problems and adjustments that I made. So, I ran into an issue on the third day of not wanting to eat, not because I was thinking about potatoes, but because I became very busy and lost a complete desire to eat. So, the research that I looked up before, what it told me not to do, I did it. And so I had to adjust the food I was eating along with understanding why I did not have a desire to eat. So I ran out of a variety of food, which had me craving potatoes on the morning of the fourth day and the third day. So let's go ahead and look at the data. So tracking the data and results and outcomes. So as we look at the charts, so this the chart to the left, the craving intensity chart, that's March 5th through the 9th. It shows that the cravings are a little bit more sporadic. They're not as stable. So I had all my cravings were high March 5th and the 6th, and then there was a drastic drop on March 7th. And then they went back up March 8th and 9th. So it was just constant. I was just craving potatoes. But if we look at March 13th through the 17th, it's more consistent in the sense of March 13th, 14th, I had a plan, so I was not craving potatoes. And then there's this drastic spike on March 15th. So craving potatoes, it was a 9 out of 10. And so March 16th, it was 7 out of 10. And then March 17th is 1 out of 10. And so when I do the 1 out of 10, doesn't mean that I'm craving potatoes. I actually happened to mention potato or something like that. So it's not that I was craving it. It was just the fact that I mentioned it. I made note of it. And so the results. So, like I said before, the first 2 days of the intervention plan worked just as planned. On the third day, I ran into a speed bump because I started to refuse to eat again. Once I adjusted the plan, I began to eat again. So, one of the discussions I want to talk, we're going to go more in depth on what happened. So, why did I think my plan worked? Why did I think it didn't work? So, I personally thought that my plan worked and it didn't work. So, on the first day, I felt super motivated because I had a plan put into place. But after the third day, I began to realize that there was a deeper issue regarding the craving. And so, even though you see my smiley face, I didn't realize that this was like the first day. I didn't realize that there was a something, an underlying thing that I did not take in consideration, even though I mentioned it in my paper. And so I say that because this is actually the quote I took out of my paper. And it said, another consideration to be aware of is how I feel during the implementation process, implementation plan, and document any progress. If this intervention plan turns out not to be successful within the first 2 days, I will begin to use food that I enjoy eating within the diet, such as apples, nuts, or pineapples in place of the hot chocolate to intensify the aversive conditions to extinguish the cravings. And so the issue with this is I actually was expecting not to be successful the first 2 days, and it was the opposite. So I actually was successful those first 2 days. Now, when I said I will begin to use foods that I enjoy within the diet, I think when I said this, I was a little bit too harsh on myself, and you don't realize how much of an emotional impact food has on you. And so this is when I started to begin to realize that it needed a completely different plan. And so I think this quote was a little bit too harsh and not taking in consideration the whole picture. And so one of the questions is how I plan to maintain and generalize my results. So the intervention plan, I said allowed me, I meant to say, I misspelled aloud. The intervention plan allowed me to realize that I have trigger foods. And so there are foods that I've been emotionally tied to, even before the raw vegan diet, that affects my diet or affects my appetite now. So the adjustment I made during the experiment allowed me to keep my mind off potatoes and to focus on and to change that um, focus from the potatoes to the hot chocolate. And so the adjustment that I made is to reward mindfulness. And so instead of rewarding myself for not thinking about potatoes, I ended up rewarding myself for being mindful that I have those trigger foods and keeping my mind or visualizing myself doing something else besides thinking about potatoes, or actually keeping myself busy, or consciously being aware that I have an emotional attachment to potatoes. And so whenever I changed that aspect, I looked at it more from a positive standpoint. I rewarded that. So it more so reinforced those positive thoughts instead of I what I it was focusing on what I can have instead of what I can't. So I know I can't think about potatoes, but if I see a potato, or if I even say potato, it's like impossible for me not to. I know this sounds so weird, but it's you don't even realize how much emotions, food and emotions have uh, on you, like how you are attached to those kind of things. And so, when coming up with an intervention plan for myself, it is vital to look at the entire picture instead of assuming that I can fix the behavior by focusing on one particular behavioral trait. And so, um, I say this because when I wrote the paper, I was so focused on how can I not think about potatoes? Or um, how can I get rid of the craving of potatoes? So I'm going to change the aversive condition in order to um, not think about potatoes, or even take away the foods that I need for nourishment to not think of potatoes. And I think that hurt me in the long run in the sense of keeping track of the data. And so once I readjusted that, I can't have this, I can't have that. I kept those foods, not taking them away, but I rewarded myself and by eating those foods and enjoying those foods, just treasuring the enjoyment. And I rewarded that mindfulness, the intentional mindfulness that you had to have. I rewarded that right there instead of just rewarding myself for not thinking about potatoes. So I say this for future behaviors, or for using this method for other things, is as much as it's important to not dwell on the past, it is even more important to understand it so that way you can adjust accordingly to your physical and emotional needs. And so, one of the things I thought about is the example of the boy in the book. I know it's called Batman, and it's an example of when someone broke in the house. He heard the dog start barking, and then he became really scared. And I know it was him and his dad. And after the event took place, his dad noticed that it was very hard for him to sleep in the dark, and because his dad worked, um, he was not the boy was not able to sleep, and the dad wasn't able to function properly. So the dad ended up going to get the boy some help. And so, what the applied behavioral analyst did, she focused on what happened, and she met the boy where he was. And so, one thing that's important is to understand the entire picture so that way you can make a plan that is suitable for your physical and emotional needs. So, she just didn't like say, stop thinking about what you're scared of, stop thinking about the dark. She put him in different situations in which he was comfortable and moving himself out of that phobia, moving himself and creating that safe space, even creating a new path of thoughts that allowed him to get over that phobia. Not that he is um, like not that he is invincible, or not that he won't be addressed with the phobia again, but she has given him strategic ways to fight that phobia. So whenever they get into a particular situation, he has already thought that through. And so that's what I mean by adjusting according to your physical and emotional needs. and not dwelling on the past, because the past doesn't define us, but it can help us understand why we the way we are today. And so that actually concludes my presentation. Here are my references, and I will be uploading this PowerPoint into my